If you all would, please introduce yourselves for the record, and you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Pardon me. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jamie Link. I'm the Secretary of the Kentucky Education and Labor Cabinet. And members of the committee, we appreciate you allowing us to defer. We were invited last month, but a lot of our unemployment insurance staff and other staff of the cabinet were in Eastern Kentucky assisting with the flood recovery. So we appreciate that latitude to defer to this month. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. Sam?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for having us today. I'm the Chief of Staff and General Counsel for the Education and Labor Cabinet, and I'd also like to personally thank you for allowing me to appear via Zoom. Unfortunately, I tested positive for COVID last week, and I still have a bit of a cough, so I appreciate the indulgence from the committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Buddy Hoskinson. I'm the Executive Director for the Office of Unemployment Insurance and also serve as the Chairman of the Unemployment Insurance Commission.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelby Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of Office of Legislative Services for the Education and Labor Cabinet.
So we'll move through our presentation. Certainly, I know we want to leave time for questions at the end. As you'll see on this slide, we wanted to show you in March of 2020 when the pandemic first, I don't know if struck is the right verb or not, but when the pandemic started, you can see the number of UI claims that were filed, UI being unemployment insurance. You can see the number of claims that were filed starting the first of the month and the significant increase by the end of the month. And that language is kind of small. The text is small, but you can certainly read that. But the number is the most important thing to show how the claims ramped up. And then likewise, in April, you can see the number of claims filed from that end of March and how they slowly decreased but still stayed at unprecedented levels all the way through the first week of May. And this graph is intended to show the impact over the last 20 plus years. And you can see the trending over the years, the Great Recession of 2009, 2008 and 2009, and then it slowly decreased year after year. And then in 2020, the extraordinary increase that was realized with unemployment insurance claims that were filed. Essentially, that was, in some cases, 10 years worth of claims in 1 year. And with this claim, unemployment insurance appointments, I'll defer to Buddy and let him explain this to the committee.
So as you all remember,
Excuse me, and I'm apologize for doing this. I don't think we really need to spend a lot of time on numbers. Okay. If we could move on to on page 5, overall objectives in the contract. If we can just jump into the meat of the topic today. And again, I apologize.
No, I understand time's of the essence. Let me get there. Did I miss it? No. So obviously, when the pandemic struck, a lot of people were out of work and they needed assistance. So the objective of contracting with Ernst & Young was to get Kentuckians help. We had an incredible number of claims to be filed, and we needed to process those as quickly as possible and get help to the people that were impacted by the pandemic. And with Ernst & Young, we had a company that had national experience, if not global experience, and had worked in this area before. So that was why the decision was made to proceed with Ernst & Young. Obviously, we were asked to come discuss the payments, the process for which Ernst & Young how they were contracted and the payments that were approved. Also, what the goals were and how the Ernst & Young staff were utilized during that contract period. So a very brief timeline. Sam, could you cover that for us, please?
Happy to, Mr. Secretary. As you all can see, this is sort of a timeline of the relevant period leading up to the Ernst & Young contract, starting with sort of the necessity for the contract. So in 2017, the prior administration closed career centers to in-person OUI services and removed about 95 staff positions. Fast forward to the pandemic. Obviously, there was a declared state of emergency, a national disaster declaration. In response to that, Congress passed a bipartisan bill called the CARES Act, which you are all aware of, and President Trump signed it into law. That bill created, amongst many other things, 3 brand new federal programs for states to administer related to unemployment insurance. Obviously, as we've discussed before, there was a massive influx in unemployment insurance claims under those 3 new federal programs, and which we'll talk a little bit about later, which necessitated, obviously, a response. And that response included the Ernst & Young contracts, which we're going to discuss. And we've provided a short timeline here showing when these relevant events occurred.
Somebody?
All right. So just to kind of give you an understanding of, I think Sam mentioned before in 2017 with the closure, we also had hiring freezes, decrease of the personnel in it, in the cabinet or in our agency, in our office. We had 23 staff adjudicating in the adjudication branch. You all either hear it as adjudication or fact finding. Those who investigate the claims when the information comes in from both the claimant and or the employer. And then obviously we've all talked about and heard many times about just the taxing on the system, correct? The age of the system, the coding being COBOL from the 70s. So the staff reduction of 2017 that you see there, the 95 employees, career development office employees or UI employees, all of that was taking out. We lost from the local offices, and UI was moved back into central office where we had a call center starting out with about 12, and then building that up over years, about 20 people being able to intake calls coming in. So I will also take the first part of this one, and then Sam will jump in at the bottom part. But part of the first part of the pandemic, as you will recall, we also did pop-up locations. We had them in Frankfort, Ashland, Owensboro, Louisville, Somerset, Hopkinsville, Covington, and Prestonsburg, just to name a few of those, where people could come and get assistance. Sam mentioned standing up new federal programs. Back on one of the previous slides that we were showing you about the surge of the increase, we had the CARES Act signed on March 28th. We didn't have federal guidance, and we talk about UPLs in your packet, unemployment insurance program letters. We didn't have guidance on those programs until 1 month later. We received that guidance on a weekend and was told to stand it up by the start of the week. Our week starts on Sunday, by the way, and just making up just so you would know the workload. So it was a time frame like no other, as the Secretary talked about. The surge of the claims, trying to get staff safe, trying to make sure that we were managing the workloads, and also trying to stand up a system that could manage all of those programs and through our intake currently. And Sam, I'll let you finish up this slide. You're on mute, Sam.
I should have learned that by now. Thanks, buddy. So as you can see, obviously quite a few federal programs coming into existence all at once, large influx of unemployment insurance claims, large amount of filings under the new federal programs. And as Buddy mentioned, we didn't receive a whole lot of guidance on how to administer these new federal programs for at least a month following the signing of the CARES Act. Now, one of the things that we did receive was some guidance from USDOL related to flexible staffing. And essentially what that guidance provided, and we sent a letter in January to this committee that lays that out more fully. But essentially what it said is go back, find folks that are trained to adjudicate UI claims or to take claims that are former employees, retirees, et cetera, hire them back as soon as possible so you can handle this influx of claims. And so that's essentially what we intended to do. And of course, the amount of claims, as you saw from our earlier slide, what was indeed overwhelming, as I'm sure you're all aware.
So I'll talk about a little bit about the EY goes. And early on and throughout our process of coming here, presenting, or just educating the public, there's a difference between what is an issue and what's a claim, right? So an individual who makes a claim can have multiple issues within their claim to be worked. And so we'll tell you that when you see the mass number that you did see coming through, and you notice that we had 53 different unemployment insurance program letters coming into us in 2020, and I think 30 some in 2021. The issue really was, how can we get that reliable knowledge? Sam mentioned retirees coming back, but not enough, right, to do so, but having another organization or group that could assist us. And we knew that was possible with Ernst & Young at the time. And so they worked and issued and supported working issues within a claim and or working those claims and trying to address those opportunities, both in the first contract and the second contract. A little bit of focus changed on the second contract as we had more additional training that happened in Labor Day, and Samuel mentioned this too, Labor Day of 2020. When we went into the second contract, we were able to do a little bit more training that addressed issues of the adjudication or fact finding. Those are one and the same. You're going to hear it one way or the other to try to assist us with that tremendous workload at the time.
So moving on to the next slide, in the first contract, I won't read the numbers off to you, but essentially $7.6 million contract, but the cited authority that was utilized to execute this contract was a sole source emergency exemption, the finance and administrative policy that is cited there. The finance cabinet approved the project, or the contract. The contract was pulled by the Government Contract Review Committee in July of 2020. I believe the terminology is that the committee voted not to disapprove the contract. So it was not denied by the committee. There was a contract modification later in July of 2020, extending it through August 30th. And you can see the modification amounts there and the total of the contract. And then the contract modified again on August 19th for scope of services. And continuing, again, the cited authority for the extension was not feasible to bid. Finance did approve the contract. The contract was pre-merger of the two cabinets, was with the Education and Workforce Development Cabinet, and then the Office of Unemployment Insurance was moved to the Labor Cabinet at that time. And Sam, you can pick it up there.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Shelby, if we can go on to the next slide. Obviously, once the Unemployment Insurance Office had been moved to the Labor Cabinet, and we saw that there had been a need for additional support from Ernst & Young, we entered into a second contract. The contract amount obviously is on your screen, and you can see that that was approved as a not feasible to bid contract. We had Ernst & Young doing a significant amount of work for us. They did have expertise in the field. They were obviously working with our teams. Again, finance approved that contract, and it went before the Government Contract Review Committee, and they enabled the contract to proceed.
So in that first contract, you'll see there, I don't have to go through every piece of it, but you'll see the amount of staff that came in to assist. And again, this was about working issues and claims, getting information that were gaps by the claimants that were not complete in order to move a claim on. And then in the second contract, we were able to do additional training for them to help us prepare and do fact finding in order to make some determinations that allows a claimant to know where they stand, right? I mean, that's the goal of unemployment. You're either eligible or you're not eligible. And if you are eligible, then move you into the benefit payment. If you're not eligible, then that moves you into the right to be able to do the appeals process. And in the Commonwealth, we have 3 levels of that. And in that second contract, we had 100 personnel the first 4 weeks, and then 25 personnel from EY assisting us and helping us get through that time.
So hopefully we've addressed how the contract came to be, the amounts that were paid, the terms of the contract. The second part of the request to come up here were the goals achieved. So you will see here the results of the work that Ernst & Young did. Over 141,000 claims and issues were worked by EY staff. And in the second contract, almost 36,000 claims and issues were worked. And Buddy has taught me that a claim can have multiple issues. So if a claimant submits a claim, if there are problems with that claim or incomplete information, those create issues. So this is a combination of the claims and the issues that were worked by Ernst & Young staff. And that concludes our presentation, Mr. Chairman, and we'd be happy to address any questions.
Do we have a breakdown on what it costs per claim based on what we paid Ernst & Young?
I don't have that with you today, sir. We could go back and pull that information off of the weekly claims report.
Co-Chair Nemus, you're the math guy. Figure that up right quick.
Yeah, I think it was like 150 a claim. I've done that math, or our staff did that math for us, which was over double what it was in Colorado, which also hired Ernst & Young. But let me see if I can find that and I'll report it back.
Okay. Representative Sharp, do you have a question, sir?
I have several.
Okay. Please proceed.
What was the? Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm sorry. Senator Thomas, do you have a question, sir? Oh, you can't. You got to ask something. Okay, I'm sorry. Representative Sharp, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you guys coming in today. One of the things I'm trying to figure out, what was the exact scope of work to be performed on this contract?
The scope of work, again, at that time was the initial claims and working continued claims and working the issues coming in on those claims and working on whether that they were totality of claims or working individual pieces of a claim for an individual.
So was this a pay per piece contract, or was this just a lump sum? Here's some money. We want you to do this.
Well, the goal, again, was we would issue a set of claims or issues for them to work out. And as they work those sections through, then we would issue more work for them to do.
So I think it was a lump sum contract. Is that right?
Yes.
There was an agreed upon amount to be paid, and then the work flowed as it needed to flow.
Yes.
All right. So was this then a time-based contract, then a lump sum time-based contract, or?
It was a lump sum based upon the terms that were agreed in the contract.
Okay. How many other contractors were contacted before they decided to go with Ernst & Young?
I don't know that I can address that question. We can check and see, but by the cited authority, I don't know. Quite honestly, none of us were here at that time, but we can check to see if there were any outreach to any other potential vendors that could have done this work, and why Ernst & Young was selected as the best. And obviously things were moving very rapidly at that time.
All right. Do we have any other contractors that were performing the same type of work for the state? Or was it solely Ernst & Young?
At that time, solely Ernst & Young.
Okay, so we have no other contractors that worked during the pandemic doing this type of work for the state?
No.
Just regular UI staff, state employees.
All right. I'd like to get a copy of the contract where it has the scope of work to be done, and I'd like to see the invoices that were paid out. Could that be provided?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Link, I don't have any comments or questions about the Ernst & Young contract, but I do want to take this opportunity again to say thank you for your help in assisting me and those who came to me for unemployment insurance. I know there were a lot of concerns about people weren't getting their unemployment, but as I said back 2 years ago, and I continue to say, with regard to my work with your department and your staff, all but one of the people, and I quantified this, I had 58 people come directly to me during year 20 and 21 seeking help, and 57 of them got their payments, and I really appreciate your help in doing that. Only one person didn't, and as you recall, there were some issues about her eligibility as a Kentucky resident.
Yes, sir.
And that's why she didn't get paid. So I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you for all you did to make sure that the people that I assisted, not all of them were in Lexington. Some, as you know, were outside of Lexington.
Sure.
To make sure they got their unemployment. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you for that, but the credit goes to Buddy and his staff, the Office of Unemployment Insurance, and a lot of our career development office staff across the state. They were the boots on the ground. They're the first line that were dealing with these claims. So we appreciate that as a cabinet and as the Office of Unemployment Insurance and Career Development Office. We appreciate that comment.
Can you all briefly discuss the with fraudulent claims in general? Do you have a total amount that was lost due to fraudulent claims? Are there court cases pending on any of these folks? And then the other side of that, the employees who were found to have violated the law, why weren't they prosecuted? Where are those employees now?
I'll just start off by saying, Mr. Chairman, that in terms of fraud, obviously there have been numerous media reports, and you as legislators know that was a significant problem very early. And the cabinet and the office took steps to change the PIN numbers, to change the way people got into the system. But we went even further and implemented a program called ID.me that has multi-factor authentication, and I would venture to say it has almost totally stopped fraudulent claims. Regarding more of the specific details that you ask about, I'll defer to Buddy and Sam from the programmatic side and from the legal side.
So you're absolutely right. The fraud in the federal programs for it standing up so fast nationwide will end up topping about $100 billion worth of fraud that will have occurred through the programs. It was the easiest way for many folks, better than any drug deal that they could have ever done, to be quite honest with you. And that was on the federal level. And I mentioned at the beginning, it took 1 month to get those instructions on how to do this. We did, as the Secretary said, stood up many measures. And ID.me, the most recent that we've done for over a year, has taken that down to under 3% of fraud. And that is tremendous. And we've also worked on what we call equity issues. Because again, with every measure that we take, we have to think about the equity issues for servicing the claimant. And so we've worked with ID.me on giving different pathways for folks to verify who they are, right? If they couldn't upload their information, they can go into a local office, to a resource room, and they can go to a trusted referee, schedule a time with a trusted referee through ID.me. We're getting ready to launch a kiosk system that will allow them to do the same thing. So that will give them 3 varied pathways in order to prove who they are, to make sure that we have the right person in front of us. So I think that's tremendous. That's the first piece. You asked about, there have been a nationwide task force. There's a statewide task force. And yes, people are being prosecuted for that on all levels as they come through. They work with the OIG's office, the AG's office, on the national and a state level. And I'll let Sam speak to the other.
Okay, that was a lot of words, but my question hasn't been answered. Sam, can you answer it?
Thank you. I think there were 2 questions in there, and I know the second question that I'm going to get to that. So just bear with me. I did want to address the remainder about individuals or bad actors that are out in the state or nationally or internationally that tried to seek UI benefits through our system. What I can tell you, and what, as Buddy mentioned, we work very closely with our federal and our state counterparts, and as well as our local counterparts. I'm looking at a spreadsheet right now that shows all of the instances where we've supported a federal law or federal investigation, whether that's the United States Treasury, the DEA, the DOJ, USDOL, OIG, USDOL proper, FBI, in their investigations. And we actually created a way to fast track our provision of records in support of their investigations, so that they can bring those people to justice sooner rather than later. And in addition, anytime that we determine that there has been fraud on the state level from individuals that are out in our 120 counties, obviously our local prosecutors are going to have jurisdiction to prosecute those individuals. We refer those instances out to those local prosecutors so that they can take action in their own communities. Now, you asked a second question about individuals within the cabinet, pardon me, that filed their own claims and I guess received benefits. Now, obviously, that was widely reported, and we testified on this very issue about a year ago next month. Now, of course, when that was reported, it was an investigation, an independent investigation was immediately called by the governor. We had the Transportation Office of Inspector General investigate these matters, and a report was produced. That report has been sent to the Auditor of Public Accounts, the Office of the Attorney General. I believe it's been sent to the legislature as well as the local prosecutors' offices. That report lays out that 35 people were investigated as a result of that investigation. Of those, 31 of them were individuals that were employed by the cabinet and had filed claims. 17 of those individuals were actually paid. The remainder had stops put on their claims before they were paid out. All 17 of those were paid because of the auto pay that had been put on. All 17 of those individuals have been required to pay back the funds that they received. Of that 17, a smaller subset looked at their own claim or looked at the claims of other individuals who filed a claim. Those individuals have been disciplined. Only one individual filed a claim, received benefits, and had actually, quote unquote, worked on their own claim. Now, that individual, when they worked on their claim, we can go back and look at the metadata and see that they actually put a stop on their claim so they wouldn't be paid. That individual wouldn't be paid any longer. That individual was dismissed. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, so no one was actually prosecuted, indicted, and I'm taking it we don't have any numbers for the claims that were filed within the Commonwealth, and you can break down federal and state claims. Do you have a dollar amount for the fraud that occurred?
Dollar amount for which thing? I'm sorry.
You can break it
I
down.
don't follow.
Just claims.
Do you mean like broadly, like all of
claims
the
that were
attempts
filed
from
within the Commonwealth, and whether that be the federal program or a state program, do we have a dollar amount on the fraud that occurred?
We can get you that exact dollar amount per month. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All
And you
right.
want it both on the state you want it on the federal pandemic
Please.
programs
Yes.
as well? Yes, sir.
And I just want to be clear, Senator Carroll, are you, when you say fraud, are you meaning the employees that filed for benefits, or do you mean
Everyone, all the fraud that occurred during that time? What was the dollar amount associated with that?
Yes, sir.
And
We'll
one
follow
thing
up.
I do want to be very, very clear about is these brand new federal programs that were established allowed individuals to file on a second and or part-time job. So I want to make sure that when we talk about fraud, we're talking about individuals that tried to get unlawfully get into our system or filed under an alias or whatever, and not the individuals that may have worked in the cabinet and believed in good faith that they were filing a claim on a second and part-time job, which some of the individuals that we mentioned did do, but were ultimately not paid.
Okay. Co-Chair Nemus, I'm going to allot you the remaining time.
I think Senator Nemus has a question or two, and I'm not going to take.
Yeah, you don't want to be cut out of the will, so I get that. Senator Nemus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think he understands that I'm a little more familiar with the subject than most here, and I'll be quick. I could talk on this all day. But Secretary Link and Director Hoskins, I appreciate you being here and taking the heat, because it was put on you after you were handed the aftermath. So, but there's some things that were said that I need to clarify. First of all, Ernst & Young was maybe nationally recognized, but they had nothing to do or any knowledge of Kentucky's law. And one of the biggest problem we had with Ernst & Young is they were not qualified by the feds to do other than basic things, which was just to receive a call and get the basic information, which we could have had our LRC do, who offered to do that. And it was late in the game when the cabinet actually asked the feds to allow them to do some things that the feds had to give permission to do. Mm-hmm. So saying they were qualified was not quite right.
Okay.
Another thing that was stated that really means nothing to the contract is half the offices were closed by the previous administration for good reason. We won't get into that because we don't have time. But the other half were closed by this administration. And if they hadn't been closed, they wouldn't have been operational during COVID anyway. So that is moot. That's something that we shouldn't even bring up. It's kind of like a casting blame that has nothing to do with this Ernst & Young contract.
I'd like to see if they agree with that, or if they have a comment on that.
Well, after I get done, I'd like to whatever you want to say.
Well, that's been lobbed 100 times. I just want to make sure they agree that that's not a legitimate point to be made.
You can finish. We're
okay.
taking notes.
And whether offices are open or not, the first half the people were put in Frankfurt, so it wasn't a loss of all the employees. And the biggest problem that we had during that time was not answering the phone. And part of that wasn't answering the phone because it was shut down because of hacking and because of fraud. Mm-hmm. They just wouldn't respond to people. Mm-hmm. But others was they were overwhelmed. But irregardless, people were not getting answered either in an office or when they called Frankfurt or came to Frankfurt and stood in lines. So the federal guidelines, I know that was a problem because they were just not forthcoming. Mm-hmm. The computer system's another thing. Part of it was hacked, and that's a good reason that I'm pushing for a Kentucky Cyber Center. That's off the subject. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. But once again, you're talking about the old system. CNN did a story that Governor Beshear won didn't accept the money back in 2009 or so to put in a new system. Governor Bevin already had an RFP to get a new computer system, just wasn't up and running. So that is somewhat a legitimate that you ran into, or your predecessor ran into a computer that wasn't able to handle the system. Mm-hmm. So when the LRC offered to help and the others offered to help, and we went to Ernst & Young, who couldn't do any better than what they could, and we paid them millions of dollars. That's why we're here. Why did we do that?
I think that's a legitimate question, and I think Sam, and this has been researched, and Sam, can you address the reduction of staff and the offer for LRC staff?
Happy to do so, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Senator Nemus, for your question. I think there were a couple in there, but I'll answer sort of the last one. Apologies, one moment. I've got a bit of a cough still. In the letter that I provided to this committee back in January of this year, I laid out the legal analysis that our cabinet has done, which shows that LRC staff cannot provide UI services, period. Kentucky Constitution prohibits it as a separation of powers matter. Kentucky state law prohibits it. It's in KRS Chapter 7. It's prohibited by federal law. As we mentioned, the merit staffing rule, it's specifically prohibited by federal regulation. Even if we moved away state law and if we moved away federal law, we still would not have been able to adequately train those individuals without pulling our UI staff away from their ongoing duties and have them trained up, which the estimate that it takes to have an individual fully trained to do UI related work is 6 months until
yes,
essentially
I'm
January
going
1.
to cut you off there because you answered the question in detail and you're going further. But Ernst & Young wasn't qualified to do what was needed other than what could have been trained of just taking the first phone call and saying you're so-and-so, you were hired here and you were let go here and that kind of stuff. The training that was needed, Ernst & Young didn't have the qualifications to do either, and by the federal standards, were not given approval to do it, even if they were trained to do that. So I appreciate your answer. And another thing that we were talking about is the offices that were opened up throughout. I want to make sure that Representative Sharp is credited for that because it was his bill that did that. And then also I have to give a shout out to someone that helped the legislature tremendously during that time was Morgan Eves.
Yes.
So that's that.
We miss her very much.
Yes, we do. But Shelby's.
I start saying, but we have a good person that you'll get to know right over on the other side of the secretary.
And Representative Nemus, I think, had a follow up.
Yeah, I would say Morgan, Miss Eves did a great deal as well, and a number of other people also, and some in the governor's office that were very helpful. And I'm glad that the governor made the transition to the labor cabinet because I think it got a lot better when that decision was made. But I did want to note there was no in-person availability so for someone to file a claim from March 2020 to April 2021, correct?
For 99% of the offices, that is correct. Yes.
Okay. So if we had 100 offices, or if we had 12 offices, or if we had one office, you had to make a phone call or some kind of online, but you couldn't go to the office. Is that correct?
You said the offices were not open. That is correct.
Right.
We did the pop-ups, but you're correct about the office.
Yes. So I don't understand why the administration keeps lobbing a bomb at the previous administration, saying he shut 12 offices down, when those offices would have been shut down anyway. So you agree with me, don't you, that whether those offices remained open or not had no consequence for well over a year from the first COVID incident in Kentucky? You agree with that?
I will say that I agree with you that we did not have enough volume to take care of those, whether they were here in Frankfort or in Bullock County,
That's not my
Kentucky, or
question.
Jefferson County.
Yeah, that's not my question.
Okay.
What I'm saying is whether all of the offices were remained open and Governor Bevin didn't shut them down or not, that had no consequence, at least for the first 13 months.
Representative, I think I can answer part of that question. And I think that the significant piece here is not just the closure of the offices, but the cutting of the 95 trained staffers that provided UI and employment related services to the Commonwealth at that time. Those individuals, had they been with the Commonwealth during the pandemic, could have provided a significant amount of support.
Okay, so
of course they were not.
Mr. Flynn, I appreciate that. So the office thing is a canard. I wish you guys would stop saying that. Now let's talk about the professionals. Right before COVID, did we need those extra 95 officers? Did we have a backlog right before COVID?
You had a backlog of.
Well,
go ahead, sir. And then the other.
We'll let Buddy go, Sam.
Yeah, whoever.
So
Buddy, you please.
go ahead. I'm just going to say that we still were working claims 3 to 6 months in the rear pre-pandemic. And so when we were talking about, or talk about backlog today, right? So backlog today, we are almost month to month in 2022. We are about 99% completely out of 2020 because some things toggle back and forth. And then in 2021 is the rest of the majority of the claims, and they said in the first part of the year, and that also goes back to Senator Carroll's notice to the fraud that we work. So
Yeah, and
yes.
I'm not talking about the fraud. So in January of 2020, month before the first, I think the first one was February 6, 2020. So in January of 2020, it's the administration's position that the delay that occurred, it was pre-COVID, the delay was out of line of historical precedent. You needed the 95 extra people. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that, well, as we reported, the claims there were 3,500 per week coming in traditionally. Yeah.
And was there a backlog
But to your
longer than it
point,
had been before?
but I just need to clarify something to the point. When you look at the historical numbers,
Okay.
right, the way that UI budget runs, and if you look at those numbers in 2019 and goes almost precedently low of one, I don't know, Shelby, you could go back to that slide. That's how our funding runs. So funding has to shrink, and so does staffing, unfortunately, when it's not supported only by those federal dollars. Right there, as you see, 141? I'm trying to make sure my progressives are right.
Yep.
141, and then you jump up to that higher number, all the way down past the Great Recession. Shrinkage had to occur in order to maintain the office staffing in general. I was a part of the 2017 who made the notices to the career centers. I know when we made that notice and what we had to do, because again, budget couldn't support itself. Staffing couldn't support itself. We could not maintain that level with the shrinkage of federal dollars coming in.
I appreciate that. Mr. Hoskinson, I think this was a massive, unprecedented problem. Governor Beshear could not have predicted it. Nobody could have.
Correct.
But to lob that allegation against Governor Bevin is wrong. It's not right. It's a cheap political point that continues to be made. The fact that those sites weren't open had no consequence. So anyway, but it wasn't Governor Beshear's fault we had this unprecedented, and he tried, and I watched him every single day, as many Kentuckians did, and he said this is unacceptable. The buck stops with me, and he's going to fix it. And ultimately, it took a long time. Probably would have taken a lot of people a long time. But ultimately, he fixed it by moving it away from where it was and the leadership that was incompetent to the labor cabinet, which did a much better job. But my point is, the fact that those offices were closed by Bevin is a cheap political point that is not based in reality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, sir.
Senator Nemus, you have another question, sir?
I just want to say that Director Hoskins, you brought up something that we overlooked, and it's rare that anyone, unless they work within the unemployment office, understands, is that some of those positions had to be taken away because there was no federal funding, and the federal funding actually takes care of those the personnel in the unemployment office. So some of those positions had to be taken because we had no funding for them.
Yes, sir. So most of our positions are federally FFTL. FFTL is just a federally funded, time-limited funds, right? So as long as you have the money coming in, then you can have the position. And so that's the reason why I asked to go back to this slide. It's a true indicator right off the bat, not just the volume of the work. To your point, as you worked in that cabinet, but it goes to how the budgets were coming in. And the federal level, it is very true that unemployment ebb and flows with what's going on. When you need unemployment, you expand it out.
Succinctly, as unemployment was low, so they weren't coming in with the dollars to have the employees,
Yes,
and they had to be cut and was
Yes,
decided
sir.
to be cut. So then when unemployment skyrocketed quickly, then you keep saying 95 employees. It doesn't matter how many employees. Nobody could have handled it. And we couldn't have had that many employees anyway because there wasn't the money to pay them.
Yes, sir. And if we had the amount of employees to look at that 2020, we would have already been letting those go. Because you look at the funding.
So
now.
to say that someone cut those employees and that they had to.
We didn't have a choice. In order
Correct.
to sustain the program, that's what you have to do.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And what we were just trying to do is show why Ernst & Young was engaged, because we did not have the resources to address the volume that struck in March of 2020.
Okay, Representative Sharp, and then we're going to Representative Beckler, and we're going to close out with Senator Thomas.
Since we're talking about the UI system, what's the status on the new UI system?
We just sent a letter to Senator Nemes and Representative Weber, with whom we are working on the Unemployment Reform Task Force. We have had to cancel the latest RFP. We had, in good faith, we had procured a new vendor. We had gone through negotiations. Everybody was in agreement. We had the contract. We sent it to the vendor to sign, and they completely went silent on us. We made numerous efforts to contact the vendor repeatedly. They would not respond to us at all. I think, Sam, I'm okay to say it's public record, correct?
Yes, Mr. Secretary.
In late August of this year, there's a federal indictment of 2 of the people affiliated with that vendor. So we elected to cancel that procurement, and we'll be coming back out with a new procurement. No one is more frustrated than we are, but in a way, I'd have to say I'm glad we didn't get into a contract with a company that has 2 people under federal indictment now.
How much have we paid that vendor to date?
0.
Great. What's a new timeline for the new system coming online?
We hope to issue the RFP by the end of this month. We'll go through the normal procurement process, but we're probably, and I'll also state that on the national stage, there are so many states that are looking for new unemployment insurance systems, and a limited number of vendors that have the wherewithal and the capacity to do that. We were hoping for a 30 to 36 month implementation plan. It's probably going to be more like 36 to 42 months.
Okay.
And hopefully that will start spring of next year as we go through the procurement process and contract negotiations.
Okay, I can hear Representative Pratt yelling at me right now to ask you about an off-the-shelf.
Yes, sir.
Have you considered that? Is that not even in the works?
We have done extensive research, and we find no viable off-the-shelf, quote-unquote, system available. If so, other states would have done it as well, and none have. They're all going the same route we're having to go, is get a contractor. The federal requirements are going to be the same for every state, essentially, but the state requirements are different for every state to some degree. So it has to be developed for a particular state. And I remember those conversations with Representative Pratt during the UI Reform Task Force. And we did research that extensively with national consultants and others, and we know of no such product.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just add to that there are things that we are doing, sir, Representative? There are products and pieces that we are doing to upgrade. We're not just sitting there. We're constantly working to upgrade the Siebel system and to constantly try to give us wins. We do a strategic planning session every quarter, and we look at what are the quick wins we can do, what are the things that we've learned, what can we make the system do, or what can we add to the system. IDME is an example of that. So we're not waiting for the RFP for 3 to 4 years down the road. We're continually trying to make the improvements that we can grab that will assist our work efficiency and will help the claimants as well.
Good point.
Thank you.
Representative Beckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Flynn, would you please provide a list of, not by name, but just 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to the 35, what the investigation was for, what the results of the investigation showed? I'm talking about our employees of the state, and what the outcome was in terms of discipline. Not now, but can you provide that to us?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And the last question is, how close are we to finally finishing all the pandemic claims?
Representative Beckler, I touched on this a little bit earlier, so I will go back to you on this for the backlog. Backlog is continuous,
Yeah,
right?
I heard that, but
Yeah, but that's what that is. So we are working through. We are in that first quarter of 2021, trying to go through all of those claims. They all have to be touched. They have to be reviewed. So I look to have us close by the February of this next year to be out of 2020 completely. And when I say completely, I'm going to say 99% because there's always a claim that toggles back. And as soon as I say absolute, I'm going to get myself into trouble. And then same thing with 21. And we are running about month to month in 2022. So I think we've done tremendous strides in that, but backlog is always going to be continuous because new things happen. The disaster unemployment recently would be another reason that backlog would change a little bit, just for that
Okay.
indication.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
And Buddy, for the committee's benefit, could you talk about 2022, where we are?
Yes.
To give you,
So 2022 gets worked directly in the field, and by that I mean in the local offices, so that as people are coming in, we've trained fact finders, adjudicators in the local offices to be able to work those claims. So we are really pretty much month to month. Looking at it earlier today, we are almost touching now the mid-August point of that. Now, please understand that that means in the fact finding, we're waiting on, if you filed in 1st of August, and it's a separation issue, we have to wait for the employer to respond as well, right, to what the claimant has put in. And that starts the next process. But we are pretty much running month to month in the year 2022. So if we, by magic, could wave the wand in 2020 and 2021 was gone, we would be the golden ticket in terms of what we're doing now in the services. And I think the Secretary has mentioned it, I know Sam has mentioned it, none of us sitting here at this table could do this without that staff who are in the trenches, who do it every day. They work tremendous long hours during the height of the pandemic, and I'm grateful every day and blessed that I had the opportunity to come back to work with those fine people because they kick butt when they need to. And every time we have a situation come up, we've had 3 disasters during the pandemic period, if you want to know. 3 times where we've had to also rally to take care of disasters. Flood in August or July, right when the Secretary came on board, then the horrible disasters of Western Kentucky, and most recently Eastern Kentucky. Those individuals rallied and quickly packed up and moved and we went, and again, I'm going to say this, and we've said this many times, thank you to my sister family in Louisiana, that we went down and picked up that mobile unit, and that solidifies why we're getting one through an equity grant. Drove that thing from Baton Rouge up here, and we were able to work claims. So I just want you all to know, and when you see somebody or you hear somebody who says they work for UI, they do kick butt. They're not perfect. None of us are perfect, but we have done extraordinary things in a period of time like no other. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that. And yes, I'm bragging on, I consider them my family because they've done great work.
yep.
Senator Thomas?
Ms. Hoskinson, I have one question for you, and I'm sorry Representative Nemus is not here. I want to go back to his point, but I'll see if I can get my question answered in just one question. In every office that was closed by the prior administration, was that office staffed? Or to put it another way, were there people working in that office at the time the office was closed?
There were people in those offices.
Is that it? Okay. And I don't, with all the discussions we've had over unemployment since COVID began, and I don't want anyone to think that any of the comments or any of the concerns that we expressed as a body had anything to do with those first line people. I mean, I can't imagine what they went through. I know the earfuls that I got, and I'm sure they got a lot more. So we respect and appreciate them all very much, and to this day, and it's a tough job and tough times, tough decisions had to be made. I think our biggest frustration was just that there was not a continual progress of things getting better. It was a long period of time when it just didn't get any better, and there was frustration that nothing was being done. And I know transferring to a different cabinet, that did help, and that's when things started to happen. So I think there was some top level mistakes made from the beginning in the way that all this was handled, and too slow to get it to the right people to get the process started to fix it. And from our end, I think that was the frustration, because call after call after call, people crying, not being able to feed their families, and there just did not seem to be a sense of urgency from the governor's office. And I'm just going to throw it out there. It falls on him, and the decisions that were made on where unemployment was, he was slow to react, and we should have been further along sooner to help these folks, and that comes from just frustration for so many calls and people just desperate, and our offices struggling to make calls to try to find resources, and it was just very difficult times. But hindsight is 2020, and what's important is that we learn from what happened through that, and it sounds like you all have made progress, and in the future we'll be able to deal with these issues again. Yes. And that's the most important thing that we need to learn from this. And there's going to be a lot of political posturing and claims made back and forth. That's just the politics, unfortunately, that go along with Frankfurt. But I think the issues could have been solved sooner. There was help and other resources to be had, and I just think the decisions were not made quickly enough. Anyone else having questions? Okay. Ms. Lewis, thank you for being here today, and gentlemen, thank you all for being here. A tough issue. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again, and appreciate all the information that you all have provided. I appreciate the difficulty that you all have gone through, and behalf of the Commonwealth, for what it's worth, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman,
And,
members of
thank
the
you.
committee. Thank you very much.